My name is Spiro, Raymond M. Spiro, and I was born in San Francisco, and I was born in April of 1918, which at this date would make me 86. But the doctor says I'm a young 86.
I believe that.
Thank you, sir.
Are we okay with the light? If he puts his head down, is that gonna be?
We're okay there.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, well, did you grow up then in San Francisco?
Yes, I grew up there, went to Galileo High School. O.J. went to school there after I did. My folks moved to New Jersey, and I attended NYU for a year, and the war came along, and the war, December 7th, 1941 was a Sunday, and after lunch on Sunday, they opened the post offices, and I went down and enlisted, and 4 days later, I was gone. And that was quite an event to live through. You know, you always remember that particular day.
That's something that stands out in everyone's mind. And were you pretty much through NYU? Were you still a student then?
You know, I don't hear that well. Repeat
okay.
that.
Were you still a student when you enlisted at NYU?
Yes. Well, when I enlisted, I was a college student, yes.
Where did you go right away after you enlisted?
Well, I'll answer that, but I'd like to tell you, when I did get out of the service, my folks had moved back to San Francisco, and I went to Cal at Berkeley, at which time I completed my education, got a bachelor's, and then I got a master's in statistics and accounting. And I'm just talking, if that's
Sure.
all right.
No, that's fine.
And I got a straight A through school and grad school, but I put that on the shoulders of my father, who was a great guy. My father had never gotten out of, he graduated from grammar school, but he was probably better read than I was when I got out of college. A very wonderful guy. He was a chess master. He could play 20 games of chess, and I've gone with him to Golden Gate Park in San Francisco and seen him do it, blindfolded. And he taught me to play chess. And I was #1 man on the Cal chess team, but that was easy after that. I could still play one game blindfolded, but I can't play more than that. I don't have that ability. But my dad took me down to a department store, the Emporium, in San Francisco when I was 5. And the offer he made me was, if I could look at the store window for 1 minute, turn around and recite everything in the window, I'd get $1. Well, $1 was a fortune then. And it took me about 3 years to master that, but I did get my $1. However, it taught me that when I was in college, I could read a book, and I can, to this day, I can bring up the page and write right off of it. But that saved my life during the war, because I could remember what I'd seen out that little window or through the scope. And it saved my life many times.
Let's kind of get on to that. Where did you take your training when you first went into service?
Well, I went into being in New Jersey. I went to a place called Fort Dix, New Jersey. Very common marshalling a yard, if you will. And I was a buck, as they call it, buck-ass private, and completed my basic training. And then a month or so later, I was offered opportunity to go to officer candidate school, and I did that, and was successful in becoming a second lieutenant. And I had a very fortunate college curriculum in which I took one class and we studied how IQ tests were put together and the intent and how to answer them and so on. I encountered the same test when I entered the Army, and I got a 163 score, which is pretty good. Good normal is 100. And at the same time, General Patton had put out a request through the service to recruit officers with high IQs, but he had an IQ of 165, and he wouldn't accept any officers with IQ higher than his. But I was selected, and I went to a cadre school out in Southern California on the desert, taught by Patton. And 100 of us started and 33 of us finished. And we were the cadre that trained the 3rd Army Tank Corps. And then I went to a series of schools. I've been to Fort Hood, I've been to Fort Knox, been on maneuvers. When I was on maneuvers in Texas, you know, as the coastline of Texas goes down and meets Mexico, I was there in late December and January, and was amazed even then, that was a long time ago, how many senior citizens lived down there. And at that time of year, it was delightful. It gets pretty warm in the summer, but we were trained and were training, and that was Patton's whole philosophy. If you weren't in battle, you were training. We're getting ready to go in battle. And his philosophy also was, when you were in battle, you got in, you did your job, and you got out as quick as possible to minimize casualties. Because the casualty rate in the armored service was extremely high. In the 4th Armored, it was a 2.4 ratio, which means for every 2,400 men, 1,000 survived. And that's a high ratio. You don't want to go into an operation with those odds against you. The highest ratio in the armored service was probably the 3rd Armored, which ended up going through North France, Belgium, and Holland. But those were prepared positions by the Germans. They had every road zeroed in. They took a tremendous beating, even more than the 4th Armored. But the 4th Armored Division had the distinction, if that is a distinction, of killing and wounding more German soldiers than any other unit in the U.S. Army.
Let's hold on for just a second, there's some noise out.
We're going.
Yeah. Okay. First question I had is, we're kind of going back to December 7th. You mentioned that you went down and enlisted right away.
Yeah.
What made you decide that you wanted to enlist as opposed to waiting for a draft?
It was rather a spontaneous decision. after listening to President Roosevelt. And I guess I'm a patriot.
Okay. And you talked about, you did a lot of training with,
Constant.
as Patton was starting to form the Army. You didn't have very much modern equipment to work with at that time, did you, with tanks?
Well, yes, we did have modern equipment. You're probably referring to the stories of infantry practicing with wooden rifles, but we had genuine equipment to work with, because if you don't work around a tank, you don't want to get into a tank when you're going into battle.
Okay, so there had already been armored divisions formed, and there were some equipment that you could work with.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, along that line, General Patton was the father, if you will, of the armored service, having come from the cavalry, and commencing a new service like that. He designed, had built all the initial tanks, laid out all the camps, wrote all the training manuals. You know, to this day, 50% of the training manuals in the U.S. Army have been written by Patton. Magnificent man. Patton always, you know, he has this blood and guts background, but he was more of a scholar than he was a warrior. He said, it's not what I do or think, it's what you perceive I do or think.
What kind of tanks did you have at that time?
Pardon?
What kind of tanks did you have at that time?
What kind of tank? We had Sherman M4A3 tanks. Now, that's an interesting question, because one of the most important battle reports that you had to complete were tank conditions, and we did those weekly, monthly, and then every 3 months we did a complete questionnaire, which went back to Detroit to the car manufacturers. In fact, Chrysler and Ford were making tanks at the time. That's why I have continued to buy a Chrysler until Daimler Chrysler bought them. And
You're not crazy about driving somebody that made Tigers or Panther tanks, are you?
no, matter of fact, a friend of mine last year bought a small Volkswagen, a very nice car, and I was sitting in the back seat, so I had a excellent view of the dashboard and the instrument arrangement. And I had just read an article about the Messerschmitt aircraft, and the arrangement of the dashboard and instruments was identical to the Messerschmitt schematic. Identical. But along the tank manufacturers in Detroit at the time would stop their production line every 3 months, having analyzed all the battle reports on tank condition and the recommendations, would make the essential changes, and then I think they would shut down for 2 or 3 days, and then they'd resume production. So our tanks kept getting better and better. In fact, the major change we made, I think in early '44, we went from a 75 millimeter to 76, which isn't very much, but it was an armor-piercing shell, which helped a lot because the German tanks, the Panzer tanks, or called Tiger tanks, compared to the Sherman, which is about a 9-foot wide, 14-foot long, 12-foot high, or 10-foot high. The Panzers were 12 feet to 14 feet high, 30 feet long, 20 feet high. They were slow, massive, but when we had 75 shells, they had 4 inches of steel in front. The shell would hit and bounce off. It took 3 Sherman tanks to neutralize 1 Tiger tank. But we were faster, more dependable, and more mobile. So, and thank goodness the Germans weren't able to produce that many Tiger tanks. In fact, the Third Army had 16 armored divisions. Each armored division had about 800 to 900 tanks, depending on composition. And so when you turned that key, went out, you had 10,000 tanks. And if you concentrated your objectives, that was an awful lot of steel going down the road toward one objective. We just cleaned them out. Particularly effective mines in North France. Since 1400, that fortress there had never been taken. And we went in there and took an awful lot of men, tanks, and dedication. I think it took 4 months to overcome it.
This was Metz, you say?
Yes.
We just
I
interviewed.
said Mainz, but it was Metz.
Okay. We just interviewed Phil Antonelli, who was in an infantry division, or actually an artillery unit that was attached to the Third Army, talking about how he spent 2 months around Metz. Said that you guys went in and out of the city several times fighting over it, didn't you?
Yeah, it was one of the campaigns that Patton wasn't too happy with. But it was so well fortified, never been taken before. The Germans didn't think we would take it then, but we, in effect, ground them down. That reminds me, you know, Patton's great psychological approach to his men. He said, I don't want my men to love me. I want them to fight for me. But he used to send his scouts out, and they'd put signs that we'd come across, and they said, kill German soldiers. So he set the stage. But you initially asked me, what kind of tanks did we have? We had, I said M4A3. That was my favorite tank.
We better go back over
Yeah.
to this.
Now, we ended up,
If we can go back and give us the kind of tank again here.
sir?
Could you repeat that?
My favorite
the
Sherman tank was the M4A3. But we ended up, at the end of the war, we had an M4A3 E8, which is a much bigger tank, width-wise, lengthwise, height-wise, better equipped. We went down from 5 men per tank to 4 men per tank. And I have some pictures of it. I'll put in the mail to you.
Okay, if you can talk pretty much to the camera and me.
Yes, okay, I will.
Yes.
But Yes, I have a picture somewhere in Germany of our tank going down the road. I'm in it with my boys, but it's an E8, but it's still a Sherman. But when we got to Africa, the British had 90% of their tanks were Sherman tanks. They just repainted them, put the British insignia on it. But General Alexandra, who was a British commandant, was a very competent son of a bitch. And I took Patton's viewpoint of him. And in fact, when we got to Italy, my job, and I didn't advertise this immediately after the war, my job was stealing gas from the British because we were trying to get to Messina before Montgomery did, and we did. But
How did you go about stealing the gas from the British? How did you do that?
I'm not at liberty to divulge that information.
Still classified, right?
Yes, sir.
When did you go into North Africa and where?
I can't remember the exact date, but it was late November '42. And we, for the first 24 hours we were there, we fought the Free French. However, our orders were not to hit anything, just to make a lot of noise and not to aim at anything, because we didn't want to fight the Free French, which we did, and 24 hours later they came to an agreement and we disembarked.
That had to seem...
And you asked me where. 6 months after we landed, they made a motion picture with, which is very famous.
Was it Bogart?
Huh?
Humphrey Bogart?
Yeah, Bogart and
Ingrid Bergman.
Ingrid Bergman and
Casablanca?
No, this was a tank movie. It was just
Oh.
I'm trying to remember, Sahara, I think is what they called it.
however, that was the winter of '42, and we found that the towns on the Mediterranean coast in Africa, the climate was just delightful. 75, 78, and you wonder why all the towns are on the Mediterranean. You get 10 miles inland, and it's 100, 110. In a tank, you don't want to be there.
Let's hold it for just a second here.
Casablanca.
It was Casablanca.
That's where we made our initial landing.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead and say that again here. I was just starting to roll here. So where did you land?
Well, we landed at Casablanca, November '42, went into battle and promptly got beat up. But we had an American general in charge of us who was not too competent, and Eisenhower replaced him and put Patton in charge. And the day Patton took over, we were either training or fighting. There was no... along that line, I had a sergeant that emphasized exactly what we were doing. He had been with me in the States through all the maneuvers, and we had a new improved Browning machine gun, and he would strip it and put it back together. If you can all remember the GI brown blanket, wool blanket, he'd have that laid out. He'd had a technical manual on the Browning machine gun, and he'd put each piece in the designated place, and he could take that machine gun apart and assemble it blindfolded. And that's what we were taught to do, because Patton's philosophy was you can't think and function under fire. You have to do it automatically, because you don't think very well when you're under fire. You just function as you've been trained to do. But one evening we were in battle, and I looked to the side of the tank. There's my sergeant out there taking his machine gun apart and putting it back, no lights. But that's what it takes. But I think that gets the idea across.
When you went in and had to go in that first day against the Free French, and you were told, fire, make noise, not make anything, that had to be rather confusing, thinking you were going in and training for all this battle, and then you were being told not to hit anything?
Would you rephrase your question?
Just saying, did that seem like a strange order to you, to think that we're supposed to go fire at these guys and not hit anything?
I do what I'm told to do. We did get an explanation with it, that they didn't want to, that they knew we were going to end up fighting with the Free French. We wanted to do it as, and they explained to us beforehand that all we were doing is making a show.
Okay.
But
You were talking.
that's one thing. When you serve in the Army, particularly under Patton, when you get an order, you say, yes, sir. Now, one time, and I won't mention the general's name, we were in France, and I got an order. We were temporarily...
Yeah, let's stop. Hey,
Tickled today.
okay.
He wants allergies.
Oh, is
They
it?
had a bad week.
Oh.
I'm going back to Alaska.
No.
I used to go back.
Oh, gosh. So it really hit you. Okay, you want to go back and can you pick it up there, Eric?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
One time we got an order moving us out of Patton's jurisdiction to a brigadier's jurisdiction temporarily, because they shifted, they're constantly shifting troops under the 12th Corps, in which we were. And this general's order was to advance at a constant rate of 4 miles per hour on this road and to stay on the road. Well, each time one of our tanks went up, the Germans had it zeroed in and they hit the tank and that was it. Every time you hit a tank, you got 5 men exposed. Well, we lost 3 or 4 tanks. I called the general and told him, and I said, request permission to vary our speed and get off the road. He said, do it the way I say it. Sent another tank and it got blasted. I called him again. He said, stay on it. He said, you follow my orders. I called him the 3rd time after he lost another tank, and he said, you stay on it. I said, General, as an officer, I'm obliged to refute your order, and it's my obligation to change the order. And I carried the manual that gave me that authority in my tank, and I read it to him. And 2 days later, he was shipped back to the United States. But it takes guts to countermand a general's order when you're not up to that grade.
Was this Freudenthal?
Yes.
You're not the first person that's complained about him.
Well, he was a general that was replaced in Africa, and Patton took his place.
Things changed totally then when Patton came in and you went back into battle then.
Yes, they did. The British changed their opinion of the American forces after the first battle that Patton was in charge of. Patton was a natural. He was a student of history. When we were in France, I happened to be in the same column behind Patton, and he stopped the column and he said, over there about 100 yards you'll find some ruins of a Roman fort. And we walked over there and there they were. He says, I know because I was there. Now, a lot of people don't believe in that, but he certainly was a student of history. Patton had read just about all the books on warfare that the German General Staff had. In fact, the German General Staff had put out a required reading list, which Patton had read, and well, this is the time, not the time yet in the interview to mention this war or tank conference that was held every 10 years, but I'll get to that.
Let's go ahead if you want to.
No, if
It's
it's
no
fresh in
problem.
your mind, just go ahead and talk
Go ahead
about
and
it.
tell us about it.
We can edit this any way we need.
Okay. Well, a tank conference is, international tank conference is held every 10 years, and the location changes. But in 1929, this conference took place out on the Mojave Desert, and in one tent was Patton, I think he was the first lieutenant, and von Rundstedt, who was the German chief of staff, and Rommel. And through that association, when in December 44 and the bulge took place, Patton was the only general that had predicted a German winter offensive and had planned accordingly. And while I'm on the subject, I'd like to talk about it. There was a man named Richardson, G3, that's operation and supply and logistics. I think he was probably one of the greatest minds that we had working for us, because he had planned and put into operation. We were in a battle in northwestern France, in the middle of this battle, and I think the bulge started December 19th, some few days before Christmas, in 44. And Hitler had drawn all of his reserves and drawn from the Russian front, and our intelligence was lacking. We didn't even know about it. And but we withdrew from the battle, made a 180-degree turn, and we had a tremendous amount of equipment, men, tanks, ammunition, gas, food, and covered 108 miles. And actually, just about 48 hours. We didn't sleep, we ate. That was remarkable. We were the first unit to reached Bastogne, and the 101st Airborne was there. And they were sure glad to see us. We had, the Army had been, or Air Force had been reinforcing them by parachute on clear days when they could see them, because the weather was horrible. And it was the coldest winter in France in 100 years. And to this day, in the winter, my cheeks hurt because they got burned, if you will. But it was cold, terrible. If you have to have favorable conditions to fight, they weren't. But that was remarkable. The Germans didn't believe we could do that. But because we did do that, and it took us approximately 5 to 6, I'd say 6 weeks, to completely reclaim all the land that we had lost in the Bulge. But after that, and that took us through January, probably into early February. After that, the only thing between us and Berlin at that time was the distance, the number of miles, the amount of gas we had available, but we had ineffective German resistance. So, in other words, as Patton said, they had shot their wad.
Did you get hung up at all at the Rhine River at that time?
Yes, we did. We did capture a bridge called the Remagen Bridge. That was a fluke, but we got it. But we ended up, I crossed at Trier, and I told Nate this story about we built this platoon bridge.
Or a pontoon bridge?
Pontoon.
Yeah, pontoon. What? Sorry about that.
More than one platoon could use it, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Why don't you start that, you built?
and we built most of our bridges when we were under fire, 2 feet under the surface of the river. That way the Germans couldn't shell it and knock it out, and didn't know where we were. And then we were ready to cross. Patton came on and got halfway out there and pulled his pecker out and pissed in the river. And he did it to symbolize it and to rub it the wrong way on the German general staff. It was psychological, but very, very effective.
The 4th Division, that was the division that actually made it to Remagen and captured the bridge?
I wasn't there. I was at Trier.
Okay, but it was units of the 4th Armored that actually captured?
Yes.
Okay.
I was in a place called, I was in an area, not an area, a division called Combat Command B. Now, we had A, B, and C. Some divisions just had A and B, depending on how many tanks they had, but it made it less unwieldy to handle, because you can only effectively command so many people down the line. After so many, you lose your control. So in order to achieve it, they established combat commands. And I get a little emotional about this one, but at Bastogne, the approach to the center of Bastogne has 2 roads leading to it in a V, one to the left, one to the right. And right at that V, I had my sergeant make a sign, a wood sign, which said, "You were entering Bastogne, courtesy of the 4th Armored Division, Combat Command B." That sign is still in the museum at in that town. So we're very proud of that one.
Have you been back there to see this now?
No, sir.
We need to stop and take a break.
I don't need to fight the war again.
Okay, understood.
Yep.
Totally. All right, do you want to take a break here just for a
Yeah,
minute?
yeah,
Yeah, let's just take a.
that'd be fine.
Just be-
And they put out a newspaper.
Different type of bulge than this, right?
Yeah. They recently printed a cartoon that we had in the Army newspaper, Stars and Stripes. It was a very famous cartoon. I just loved it. It shows this GI soldier, and he has a nose that has a kind of a step like that, and they come across this village in France, and most of the people there have the same step nose, and he said, "This must be the village Dad keeps talking about."
Oh, that's great.
And along that line, when the war was over, the Army had a radio station for the troops that were remaining in Germany, and it was in Munich, and they had a program at noon, and they called it Luncheon and Munchin. Great program.
Of course, a lot of Americans don't know that the German name for Munich is München.
Munchin, yes.
And
Along that line, I was just reading a book about Valhalla. Valhalla is a white granite marble temple located in Regensburg, Germany, and it houses statues of German notables, poets, philosophers, mathematicians, musicians, and it is probably one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. Very remarkable, and it has a lake in front of it, and the marble steps in front of the temple come rising out of the water. They drained the lake, built the steps, and then filled the lake again. Then on the other side of the lake, they have a path that is about 5 feet lower than the level of the lake. So when you look across the lake, you're looking at eye level across the lake, and then the steps are coming out of the water into the temple. And it's just magnificent, absolutely magnificent, all white granite. One of the prettiest things I saw in Germany. I think the people had that much talent and that much ferocity.
That is amazing.
after you got across the Rhine, you talked about the German resistance that just kind of collapsed at that point. Was there sporadic fighting, but you weren't running into many organized units?
I would say that's essentially correct. Occasionally we get some resistance, but what we found, and this is my condemnation of Adolf Hitler, who was willing to fight to the last 12-year-old boy in uniform. That's what I disliked.
Did you see a lot of that?
Too damn much. And old men like myself.
What were the German people like as you went through? as you got into Germany? How were they reacting?
Well, I recall one incident when we had captured the town, and I speak German fairly fluently. Ich kann ganz gut Deutsch sprechen. And I went out and talked to this older German man who was standing on the corner, and he talked to me and told me that the Americans were much like the Germans in their propagandizing. And I said, in what respect? And he said, well, see all this equipment, and we were just barreling through the town with trucks, tanks, you name it, every kind of vehicle. He said, you're just going around the town to impress us. But that's an illustration of the might of the America in being able to supply that much equipment and get it to the front. Patton established what they call the Red Ball Express. The Red Ball is still an express company in the United States. Two fellows that worked for it as soldiers during the Second War set it up and carried the name. But the Red Ball was a express 2.5-ton Army tanks carrying gas, ammunition, food to the front lines, and deadheading back empty, and nobody but a general officer had the authority to stop those trucks. But what I'm leading up to was I stopped one. I was a lieutenant colonel, but we had, in northern France, we'd come across a warehouse that was full of French champagne, which we found out. But it initially had 2 German guards on it, and they weren't too much trouble. And there was enough there for 2 truckloads. So I sent 1 truckload to Patton, and I signed his name per myself. And I got a thank you back. And but that was the only time I ever did that. I figured I could handle that one.
What'd you do with the other truckload?
But
What happened to the other truckload?
pardon?
What happened to the other truckload?
We took care of it. Took us a while to work our way through it, but it was very wonderful stuff.
We need to get this guy together with Phil Antonelli.
Yes.
Phil Antonelli has he liberated a lot of alcohol himself in France, and I think you were in a lot of the same areas.
Yes, sir. Well, that was a magnificent find. It really was. But one of the more difficult things, and the war ended in early May 8th, I think, 45. But it was essentially over when the Bulge was over, because only distance and remained between us and Berlin. Eisenhower made the decision not to try to take Berlin because he estimated that it would take 1 million American lives to take Berlin. And the Russians paid the price. They lost 1 million soldiers in taking Berlin. So he did the right thing, I think. I'm alive.
General Patton didn't necessarily share Eisenhower's viewpoint about that, did he?
You're telling me that Patton wanted to spruce up the German army, go on and conquer Russia. It was his belief that we'd have to fight Russia sooner or later, so we might as well do it when we were prepared to. I was neutral on that. We did meet the Russians, was the Elbe, I think? And I remember they had the Cossacks were part of the Russian army, and they put a show on for us. And they took a field and had grass that was pretty high, maybe 4 or 5 feet high. And on horseback with their sabers, they cut it down to 2-3 inches. Just like that. Magnificent horsemen. And boy, can they drink the vodka.
That was here before.
The one of the more difficult things we did,
Okay,
I
let's
think-
hold on for just a second, there's some noise in the
I
hall.
was in the third, and he was into those warehouses in France too. He was scout company. They got into one night and they really tore into it. And he was a half-track driver. Well, they were too drunk to even get back in the half-track. They fell down this crater, bombed out crater hole. A little bit later, they hear a round coming in, took out the half-track, and all the guys that were drunk down in the hole survived.
yeah,
I've always
Concussion.
Good reason for drinking.
Oh, yeah.
concussion will do that.
I had a. You want to go ahead?
Yeah,
William,
I'm
and
yeah,
so-
go ahead.
Okay, you got next question? You
Oh,
wanna-
I was just, you talked about linking, you actually linked up with the Russians at the end of the war. Where did you end up at the end of the war in Germany?
Actually, I didn't end up in Germany at the end of the war. I ended up in Czechoslovakia. And I can't remember the town right now, but when I was living up the mountain, I belonged to the Mount Vernon Country Club. And there was a lady there that was kind of the general manager. And she lived in Czechoslovakia and was a little girl, about 10 or so, and remembers our tanks coming in her hometown. So I remember anything I wanted at that club, I got. She was nice to me. But I started to say one of the more difficult times I had, and it certainly makes an impression on you. About the middle of April '45, we were coming to Erlangen, near Wiesbaden, and the I can't remember the name of the slave camp we came across because I tried to put it out of my mind.
Do you remember that?
Buchenwald.
Buchenwald. They have a general headquarters there, and to this day I can draw you the map, the outline of that building and so on. So vivid. But there were 21,000 inmates, and we had the 124th hospital evacuation unit to our right, and we had called them, and they had to remove 7,000 people to the hospital, or they would have died. That's how, but bad conditions. And all the atrocities you've heard about, they're all true. Very, very difficult. And when we stopped about 10 miles before we approached the camp, because we knew it was there, and we had a meeting of our officers and agreed that we took no prisoners. And I put that on my battle report and never got questioned.
Did you encounter Germans when you went into the camp?
Per?
Did you encounter Germans, guards, when you went to the camp?
A few.
Okay,
We,
hold on just a second, we're getting noise again. I was here.
Over here.
Is it? Okay.
Tell them to be quiet.
Yeah, I don't wanna,
ask you a question.
They call me one of Patton's boys.
I'm just reading a book on that.
Were you?
Okay, let's get back here.
So, you had stopped outside of the camp, right?
Yes, sir.
And what were the orders then?
Repeat that, please.
I was just saying that,
What were your orders before you went into the prison camp after you'd stopped?
What about the prison camp?
Yeah, what were your orders before you went into toward the prison camp? You were 10 miles out, and you were given orders.
We had no orders. We just decided among ourselves we'd take no prisoners. We felt that anybody that worked in that camp didn't deserve to live. And when we got there, conditions warranted our decision. They were horrible. Talk about piles of bodies. Had we not gotten there when we did, there probably would have been 10,000 more people dead. Now, I made out a full report on that to Patton. And you know what he did? He made this entire city of Erlangen go through there, escorted through, and showed them all the conditions.
Were you there to see that?
Yes, sir.
What was their reaction?
Unbelief. Now, I would say 80% of that was probably true, but a lot of people did know what was going on. But to talk to them, everybody didn't know a thing, you know.
you need to stop, you kind of have a little tear on your cheek there, we don't want you to,
Yes, sir.
that kind of underneath, and we can understand why.
Yeah, you don't want that.
That had to be. I just can't comprehend.
Now, let me tell you a couple of interesting, remarkable things of the war that, you know, in April 45, the Germans were surrendering because they'd much rather be American prisoners than Russian prisoners. And I had this, you've heard this story, I'm sure. German infantry mechanized division surrendered to us. And this full German Oberst, full colonel, had been to New York City High School, and he spoke English as well as you and I do, and I had to keep him with me for several weeks because it took a lot of paperwork to get name, rank, and serial number correct, and double and triple check it. And then I sent one of a corporal, I think, and I have a picture of it somewhere, in a Jeep, and he had a carbine, which is a minor M1 rifle. But his gun was, there's a little station for it, and it was strapped in. So not ready, just strapped in the Jeep. He's flying the American flag. I insisted he post one, leading this entire mechanized infantry division, fully armed, because you couldn't disarm in the field. Down there on the highway had a curve in it, so I got a picture of the whole thing. And it was quite remarkable to see one American lead this and 17,000 group into prison camp. But I kept the German colonel with me. And finally, the war had ended by then. And I got to know him, and he was a very likable, very nice man. And I finally took him to German officers' prison camp and turned him over and said goodbye and figured I'd never see him again. Well, back in 1964, I had done some work for muscular dystrophy. They sent me to,
Let's hold up for a second.
Go ahead.
they sent me to New York City,
Okay, what was this in what was it?
64,
And you were doing what?
a muscular dystrophy convention. And Sherry Lewis gave me a plaque or something. And right after that, I went downstairs, and in front of this hotel, this colonel tapped me on the shoulder. He's a VW dealer in Long Island. So he insisted that I move out of my hotel, come over and stay with him for a couple of days, and we fought the war again. But it was quite remarkable meeting him again. Then I had another occasion in which I had been early in the, well, we were just arrived in France, and we were short of some critical tank parts. So they sent me and a sergeant of mine to London to hand carry some requisitions through this tank warehouse. And I met this RAF officer who was quite helpful, and he knew a lot of the people that I had a contact. So I got to be good friends with him. And one night he'd take me to the RAF club, and one night I'd take him to the American Officers Club. And that lasted about a week, and then he said goodbye to me because he had to go back to his unit. He was in a RAF bomber squadron based in Scotland. And I said goodbye to him, and sure nice knowing you. Well, about 6 weeks later, I'm going down the road, and there he is, hitchhiking. He'd gotten shot down, captured, escaped, and was trying to get back to his unit. So I kept him with me for a couple of weeks until we came across a RAF unit, and I turned him over and said, sure was fun meeting you, meaningful to you. Back in the 1850s, the British sent their black sheep of their family to a place called Bighorn, Wyoming, which is near Sheridan. Sheridan is 25 miles from Montana border. And I had retired once before, and I lived in Sheridan, Wyoming, which is 5 miles from Bighorn. And this RAF flyer that I had talked about, I was walking down the street in Sheridan, and he tapped me on the shoulder. He'd come out to visit his brother who lived in Bighorn, and I got to see him again. But to make it more interesting, you know, the British people, when they have a lot of money, they believe in servants. And we drove out there, and there was a man there to park my car, and a butler to let us in the house, and a maid to show us into the drawing room. But they believe in servants, and they live well, but they're nice people. In fact, this Bighorn is so important to the British that when I lived up there, Queen Mary at the time came out to visit that, and she landed at the Sheridan Airport, and I got to see her, but I was 2 blocks away, and the security was pretty tight. But interesting community, because those people, when they came out, had some money 100 years ago, and they bought a lot of land, and they're very large cattle people up there today. Give you that background.
Right, you want to take a break now?
Yeah. Or would you just prefer to keep going? And
Let's keep going for a couple of minutes and call it quits, okay?
Okay, I think we had a few more questions that we kind of jumped ahead quite a bit from North Africa all the way to France, and we wanted to kind of fill in some of the gaps about where you went from North Africa and then on there. Were you involved at all at the battle at Kasserine? Kasserine Pass?
Yes. You name the major tank battles, I've been in them.
Kasserine was not one of our better experiences, was it?
No. But you got to take it all in stride.
What do you think, do you think we were just too inexperienced to go against the Germans at that point and had problems with that?
It isn't that we were too inexperienced. I think it was the fact that we were fighting the best trained, most experienced army in the world. You have to give the Germans credit. They had a lot of well-trained people and a lot of equipment, and very good equipment.
Were you aware of Rommel's reputation at that point?
Yes, sir. Patton filled us in. He regarded Rommel as the best general the Germans had.
How quickly did it take for the Americans to learn how to deal with those kind of experienced and competent soldiers?
That's a very penetrating question. I would say it took us a whole year to adapt to fighting under African conditions, which are severe, against German efficiency. We did encounter some Italian troops that were fighting on the side of the Germans initially, and they were not much opposition at all. They'd start a fight and they'd run. But it took us a year, and we gained experience. But like I said, we were constantly in training. We weren't training, we were fighting. But when we got into a battle, we get in and we get out as quick as possible.
Did the Italians act the same way when you went across to Sicily and then into Italy?
Well, to answer that question obliquely, the Germans were of the same opinion we were, and have effectively moved the Italians to the point where they were supply troops only.
So they didn't want to rely on them.
That's right.
So even when you went into Italy, the Germans were the ones doing the fighting.
That's exactly right. In fact, you know, Italy, if you know the geography, runs from the Alps in the north down to the Boot in the south. But the mountains in Italy run across Italy. They don't run down, and the Germans had fortified every single ridge. It took our troops, because I left Italy in August of '44 to join the 4th Armored in France, but it took us through January of '45 to reach the top of Italy into Austria, to Bremen. However, you know, there's been a lot written about the wisdom of doing that, but we did engage 400,000 German soldiers in Italy that otherwise would have been fighting against us in France. So, and I think I've told the story before, but it's an amusing one of, we were north of Rome, and we've been trying to take this particular ridge for 3 or 4 weeks, but it's extremely difficult terrain, well fortified, and we weren't getting anywhere. And I had this brand new second lieutenant report to me, and I didn't know what to do with him, so I made him a supply officer. And I told him that night, when it got dark, to bring up this convoy with gasoline and ammunition. Well, this poor young man, I think he'd been out of OCS 2 weeks. Nobody had bothered to tell him that when the boys that drive the trucks, you have to give them the order to turn the lights off and use the lights only through the slits. So the lieutenant didn't tell him that. So the boys all turned the lights on, turned the radios on, and brought this convoy up, and the German commandant could see them coming, hear the music. He thought the whole army was coming, so he withdrew. Well, General Clark, who we were under, wanted to court-martial him. But I got to the general and explained the circumstances. And he said, "Get that second lieutenant out of my sight. I never want to see him again." So I kept him in the rear all the time. But it did save lives. But that's one of the things that happened in the war.
It's amazing how much somebody bungling like that could actually do something right accidentally.
That's right.
But even in war, you need a little luck.
You need a lot of luck. You know, I got blown out of 3 different tanks, never got a scratch. Once through the turret, twice through the sides of the tank. Black and blue, yes. That Purple Heart is the medal I don't have.
You were pretty unusual in the fact that you didn't get wounds as a tank officer.
Yeah, you don't find too many tankers in one piece when you find them. I have, just for sake of the interview, I have 3 Silver Stars and 6 Bronze Stars. But I was in combat for 2.5 years straight. And you accumulate a lot of medals when you serve with Patton, because you go through a lot of battles. And we had 1st Armored and 4th Armored got a lot of unit citations. So I don't know how many I have. Doesn't matter.
Did you feel that the fact that you were with Patton and such a great leader, that you had a better chance of surviving?
Absolutely. I would have never gotten the discipline and the training I had, and they ran a study after the war of the officers that served under Patton, and 98% of the men that served under him were successful in business.
So discipline carries on beyond.
Well, I think the Army has been beneficial in giving just about everybody that served in it a sense of discipline.
If this is an area that you don't want to talk about, that's fine. We'll just leave it. But for what reasons were you given the Silver Stars?
Repeat that.
Why? What were the actions that you were involved with, and for what you received the Silver Stars?
Well, the only one I remember vividly is a very difficult one for me to talk about, but I will. This was during the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans were trying to break through and reach Antwerp, which was our loading area where we brought all our supplies in. And Antwerp is, by way of meandering a little bit, a container port. In other words, the freight handling business had evolved to the point where they would load very large containers onto the holds of ships, drop them in the hold, and in Antwerp they had the equipment to take these containers directly out and store them directly into the warehouses without taking them apart piece by piece and so on. So in Georgia, our state of Georgia, they had evolved this type of loading, and in Antwerp they were on the receiving end, and it was very, very efficient. But the Germans were driving toward that port during the Battle of the Bulge, and their chances of reaching it at one point were rather good. But I got the order to hold this particular line, and Patton came down and told me that it was very, very vital.
Hey, let's stop just a second here, okay?
Sorry, gang.
We don't want to choke.
It's rough.
Like I said, my allergies, everybody's got them.
Oh, gee.
And I used to go back in Alaska, so I'm burning up too.
Yeah, I'll bet. A little difference there.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay, we'll go right back. Okay, we'll just pick up.
Well, they can erase that.
Yeah, I edit around these things.
Yeah.
We
I
ready?
hate to get disruption.
Patton told me it was, he said, essentially, he said, if you can hold their attack, contain it, he said, you'll save us 3 months and countless thousands of lives. So I had 100 tanks under me at the time, devoted to that purpose. And when the Germans attacked, we defended, but we lost every tank. 100 tanks, that's 500 men. But we did hold them. That's where I earned that star. The rest of them, I don't remember. But it was pretty easy to pick up medals when you were in action for that long a time in constant combat. In fact, I went 2.5 years sleeping under the sky, which I prefer to this day, than in a house. We used to have an exercise where we would try to get, in 10 seconds, we'd be around the tank, to get in the tank, get it going, and get it. We never did achieve the 10, we got it down to 12 seconds, so it saves lives. I don't think I could climb onto a tank today.
Question I had, with all of this travel across Europe the way you went, and you were talking about supplies, did you ever get bogged down? How many times you get bogged down just waiting for gasoline for the tanks? Or were they able to keep up with you most of the time?
No, we got, actually didn't, we wouldn't get bogged down. We'd run till we ran out of gas. Then we'd have to stop. Those were our orders. We made more miles that way.
Did it leave you in more danger at times because you were out of gas and couldn't?
Not usually, not toward the end. There wasn't that much resistance. In fact, the last couple of months, the townspeople were actually glad to see us because they knew once we came in, the war was over for them.
Nathan, do you have anything that you know of that we haven't discussed or you'd like some more detail on?
The
one question I would like you to go through, for me, Ray, is I'd like you to, we were starting to get to it earlier, but we got sidetracked on some other stuff. Can you tell me how you got from, or actually tell Phil, how you got from a first lieutenant coming out of OCS to, you came out as lieutenant colonel, was that?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Can you tell us what was the process? How did you go through that? How did you end up going from being first lieutenant to lieutenant colonel, basically?
Well, let's see, I was a second lieutenant when I went to work for Patton. When, after I finished the school, I became a first lieutenant. When we went, just before we went overseas, I became a captain. I was a captain for a long time. When we hit Italy, I became a major. And then when they sent me to France, I became the XO for Abrams, who was 37th Tank Battalion commander. And when he left, I took over the battalion.
It sounds like General Patton was different in the sense that he was not necessarily like a headquarters general like Eisenhower was. He was really much more active with you field commanders, wasn't he?
The answer is yes, and to illustrate it, Patton had written a technical manual, which I happened to have in my hand, and I was under this tank trying to get it going. The track had come off the right side of the tank, and he wrote a manual on how to get it on. There are 6 rotors on each side of the tank, and if you could attach the track, which is a pretty 2,000-pound piece of equipment, onto the 4th wheel, you could get enough traction to get it into the depot to get it repaired. I was down in the mud doing this, and Patton came by in his Jeep and asked me what in the hell I was doing down there. And I said, well, I have your manual, and this is what I'm trying to do. And he got down in the mud with me and showed me how to do it. Does that answer your question?
He sounds like a very unique man in that he did that. You wouldn't see many generals in the mud.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about when you got to meet Winston Churchill?
Say that again, please.
Can you tell us when you got to meet Winston Churchill?
Oh, yes. I think we were in Morocco, and Churchill had visited the British troops and came over and was having a conference with Patton. Patton called me over, and he said to Churchill, I'd like you to meet one of my better tank commanders. So, and that was, I guess, the high point of my career. I'm an admirer of Winston Churchill. I've read everything he's written. Very genial, well-spoken man.
What did you think of serving under Mark Clark?
Not very much. Mark Clark had the opportunity to end the Italian campaign, I believe, by attacking south of Rome and capturing maybe 350,000 German troops, but he chose to attack Rome and forewent that opportunity in an effort to gather some glory for himself, but he failed, and therefore Americans didn't reach the top of Italy until January of '45. We could have ended the campaign right there and then. That's what I think of General Clark. And my opinion isn't mine alone. It is the general historical analysis.
What did he do that he kind of blew the opportunity? Are you talking about Anzio invasion? the invasion of Anzio? Is that what you're talking about?
I was at Anzio, yeah. No, I'm talking about, had we gone on from there, but he did not pursue the opportunity.
So there were troops he could have gone after, but he would rather go into the city then.
That's right. Patton's theory is, when in doubt, attack.
Obviously, he needed to learn. General Clark needed to learn more of that. But what was your reaction when you found out Patton had died in late 1945?
Sorrowful. Actually, the story about Patton is erroneous. What really happened in Berlin was Patton was in a Jeep. I've seen pictures of that, and it shows him he was in a truck. He was in a Jeep. It got broadsided by an American 2.5-ton truck. And he was right as the passenger. The truck hit him, and he's fortunate that he died, because he would have never made it. He lived for about 10 days or so. But I was very sorrowful.
How did you find out about that? Where were you?
I'll go around a little bit to answer that question. Patton was a wonderful general, a lousy politician, and Eisenhower relieved him from the Third Army and assigned him to a paper army, but he was also designated as a military governor of Germany. And I had put in for military governor of Germany in early April because I didn't think my luck would hold out if I went to Japan. In fact, I always felt I was on borrowed time. And so 2 days after Patton became military governor, I was in military government I was a military governor of Bavaria, Bayern, which is southern Germany. That's where I was at the time.
How long were you there in that role?
Well, the war ended in May 45, and I was there until August of 46. I had gone to my commanding general at the time and told him I wanted to leave the service and go back to college and get out in time to register in September. And he had gone to Cal, and I was going to go to Cal, and so my orders came through, bang, like that. That's where I was.
So you were military governor of Bavaria for, what is that, 5 months, roughly?
I don't hear you.
So about 5 months you were military governor of Bavaria?
No, longer.
Okay, so it was the next year that you
Yes.
went back to college? Okay.
Yeah, from May
In
45 till
46.
August of 46.
Did you have to carry out operations against holdouts, like the werewolves?
Not really,
No?
no. The, give you an idea, we received a great deal of cooperation from the German people when the war was over. And our mission in military government primary mission was to get the German people and the economy self-sufficient so we didn't have to feed them. And to give you an example, I became quite friendly with the Oberbürgermeister of the city, and we used to ride together to the Rathaus, or the city hall,
Munich?
and we went over this bridge, and I turned to him and I said, there's a parallel bridge here that was destroyed. We had destroyed it. And I said, it would relieve the congestion on this bridge and is badly in need of repair, and we'll be glad, the Army will be glad to furnish the gasoline necessary to move the equipment, because the Germans didn't have the gas. That evening when we went home, the German workmen were on that other bridge repairing it.
So you had quite a bit of authority to be able to make some things like that happen, didn't you?
Yes, sir. The power of life and death.
I'm trying to think if we have any, is there anything that you know about that you've heard that you'd like to have?
I think he's covered it, especially I like the story about the young lieutenant.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I had just one question. This goes back when you were talking about tanks. And the Tiger tanks, you said it took 3 of our tanks to take out one of theirs. How did you get them destroyed if you couldn't penetrate the armor?
That is a question that has been up in a lot of classrooms, and it's a very good one. Well, you couldn't attack a Tiger tank from the front, but you try to hit the track and get the track off the rotors, and or the rear of the tank were susceptible. Those were the weak spots on the Tiger tank.
You didn't always have a choice of getting to the side or to the back, did you?
Not the back, but the sides, yes.
That's where your extra maneuverability was really helpful, wasn't it?
Yes. So sometimes the infantry would help us by getting close to a Tiger tank and putting a grenade on the track, their track.
Which was a bigger danger for you as a tanker? Was it the other German tanks or was it the German anti-tank guns?
Yes, but we had anti-tank guns too. And actually, TDs, tank destroyers, what we did, I think we used our tank destroyers a lot more effectively, but we didn't have our TDs mobile. What we did was put them in strategic locations, say a road come and turn, put them at the turn, we could pick the German tanks off at the time. Most effective strategy.
But the German anti-tank guns,
Theirs were more mobile, you know.
and were they hard to go against? Did you,
No, not too bad.
I hadn't believed in charging ahead. I've heard talk of the fact that they wouldn't shorten the range, so if you kept pushing in on them, that...
Well, the Germans had a technique. If they were zeroed in on a road, they'd put a shell in front of you and back of you, and then it had you zeroed in. But their favorite strategy was to hit the lead tank, get the column stopped, then start taking the rest of the tanks off. But you should soon learn to get off the road.
just like you did in North Africa?
Yes.
Did you feel like you had it a lot better than the infantry?
Sure.
Did you feel like you had it a lot better than the infantry?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Felt lucky to be a tanker?
Hmm?
Felt lucky to be a tanker as opposed to something else?
I didn't know anything better, so I don't. I did what they told me to, so went there where they. So, one thing I've talked to fellows in the Navy, they got to eat well. Sometimes we would get our food warmed up on the manifold. That's the way we get hot food.
Okay, so everything
But
else-
living in a tank day by day for 2.5 years, you get pretty much routine, you know. And your training, our training was superb. It really was.
You experienced just about every kind of weather and every kind of terrain that an army could, didn't you?
Well, going from North Africa to the winter in France, yes. But you know, I think the best reception we ever had was in Palermo, Sicily. Those people were so grateful to see us and so nice, and the weather was magnificent. The people were lovely.
Can you describe a little bit about this race with the British that you had in Sicily? What was going on there?
Repeat your question
I was just
differently.
saying, can you explain exactly why you were racing the British in Sicily?
Yes, I can. Patton's ego, say it bluntly. But he had been assigned a subordinate role, and he didn't like it. He told us so, and he said, "This is what we're going to do." Now, strictly speaking, he went against orders, but that's what he did. He wanted the recognition.
So you basically just went on an all-out blitz to try to reach Palermo,
That's right.
and you beat them.
Well, Messina and Palermo. But Palermo, I think it's a very picturesque, pleasant place to be.
Did you have much time in between battles? Were there times you could enjoy something like Palermo or any other part?
No, sir. We didn't have that much time. Because when we got through, we went into training and got ready to move on. Because Patton's whole theory was the sooner we got to Berlin, the sooner the war would end.
Have you been back to Europe since the war?
Yes, I have. I went to England, Scotland, and Ireland, but I would not go to. And while I'm on the subject, I was going to say I would go over to Europe, but you have to realize when you're in England or Scotland or Ireland that these people are Europeans. We speak the same language, but it means something different. The words don't mean the same as ours, they just pronounce the same. You have to understand that, and then you get along fine. And their beer isn't cold.
But you wouldn't go back to France or Germany?
Well, there's some beautiful places in Germany and Austria. I think one time when the war was over, I took a trip and I was in Austria and I stayed at a hostel, hotel. And I remember falling asleep at night, hearing the river that was down alongside of us, rustling. Boy, that lull you to sleep. What a beautiful place. And I was in a little place in Italy. If I had to travel to Europe, I would go to northern Italy. The food is wonderful, the scenery is magnificent, and if you travel along the north coast of Italy, the little town of Colli Sarco, where they specialize in making or sculpturing wooden statues, and they're quite famous for it. I have one of them. And you can see the mountains and the lakes, look over on the other side and see the ocean. If I had all the money in the world, I'd build a villa over there, and I live over there part-time.
We've got to get this guy together with Phil Antonelli. Yes. We talked about our friend Phil. His wife, Romana, is from northern Italy. She's from the Alps region, there, the northern part of Italy. And we did an interview with Phil, like we're doing with you, about 2 weeks ago.
Did she?
Romana fed us a pound of pasta.
Did she say the same thing about the area as I did?
She speaks
It-
Trento.
Probably one of the most rewarding places to be.
I'd like to ask one question, and we can kind of wrap up. What did you do after you got out of college, and you said you retired later? What was your line of work after you came out?
I became a printer. I went to work for a printer selling business forms. And then I came to Denver, and in Denver I met a very nice fellow printer named Jack. And I've known Jack for 36 years, 1968 when I met Jack.
Now we know. All right. Do you have anything specific here?
I don't think so.
Nathan, do you
I thought
think of
we-
anything?
Yep.
Wow.
Okay,
Hope you boys enjoyed it.
we did,
Oh,
absolutely.
This is marvelous, and we thank you so much. We appreciate this.
Yeah.
Very much.
When
that
you're
hap-
talking, we've interviewed about 60-some people, and probably 5 or 6 of them were in Patton's army or in very similar types of situations. So when you bring things up like this, I'm always thinking about what these other guys have talked about and how similar their experiences were to what you had, and to the kind of things that really relate well that when we do put together programs about World War II and things like that, the kind of things that you talk about flow so nicely into what these guys have said, and vice versa.
It'll be a very good program.
You know, one thing I didn't say that's off the record, it really impressed me after and it shows you how cunning General Patton was. After the bulge, and most people who weren't there don't know this, we all had to take our patches off, and any ID we had sprayed on our tanks or vehicles, just spray them off. Because and then he said he wanted the German civilians to know the army was there, but not that the 4th Armored was there. He didn't want the Germans to know where we were. So we wandered around, and the German staff lost their location of the 4th Armored Division.
That's why they did it.
Hmm?
My uncle had the same orders.
Did he?
Yeah. Took off the patches, all that.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, but if you weren't there, you didn't know that. But that was the purpose of it, because, as I said, the reason we didn't get to Berlin sooner was we didn't have enough gas or couldn't cover enough miles. But there were some days, one day we went 90 miles and then ran out of gas. You know, we get 5 miles to a gallon.
How long did you have to wait for the gas to come up after this?
Well, we used to use the Red Ball quite a bit, but by the time we got to the German border, they were using the rail, and that helped a lot.
It was just so much further for the trucks at that point, wasn't it, to
Yeah.
make the round trips?
Of course, weren't they bringing the gas in from the Channel coast and then taking it all the way across France? at
I
that
don't.
point?
I don't know.
Okay, that's what I've heard, and that's what I've read before about this.
I don't know, except that we never had enough gas. We would consume over 1 million gallons of gas per day when we were active. But that's a lot of armored divisions and trucks and jeeps move. One thing we noted through the campaigns, the German army, we were 100% mechanized. German army at its height was only 25% mechanized, mostly horse-drawn artillery, horse-drawn whatever.
I had no idea.
It's amazing, they're so famous for the Panzer divisions and for the armored warfare that they started. Yet you don't realize that they were that reliant then on
That's right.
Just
something
like-
I didn't know.
Well, you have to get inland in the country to see that.
kind of resistance they met going across, conquering Europe, it didn't extend them that much until the Americans came at them.
That's right. Well, I think I've given you a pretty good, enough material to chew on.
You have, you
Okay.
absolutely have.